Cassie Wren awoke to an unusual tightness across her shoulders and neck, a strange itch that seemed almost alive beneath her skin. At first, she thought it was a dream residue or some reaction to her old sheets, but as she sat up and rubbed at her skin, a cold, creeping fear settled in. Glancing into the mirror, her breath hitched. Jagged black markings stretched across her collarbone and up the curve of her neck, sharp and intricate as if carved by an invisible hand with an expert's precision. The shapes twisted in patterns that made no sense, glowing faintly under the morning light, yet they throbbed with a life of their own. Eli, her 12-year-old brother, peered into her room with wide, frightened eyes. "Cassie, what is that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Their parents, absorbed in the trivialities of breakfast, waved him off, leaving Cassie alone with the realization that the markings weren't a rash, weren't a stain, and certainly weren't something that could be washed away. A cold whisper seemed to brush across her ear, almost inaudible, a voice promising impossible power if she dared to follow it, and Cassie felt her heart hammer in panic, unable to decide whether to scream or obey. The next night, the house seemed different, or perhaps Cassie's perception had shifted. Shadows gathered in corners, stretching unnaturally long and pooling like ink across the walls. Every creak of the floorboard sounded deliberate, every gust of wind against the windowpane a whispered warning. Cassie tried to ignore it, but the markings burned softly, a constant, pulsing pain that seemed to anticipate every movement she made. Eli swore he saw figures lurking in the dark hallways, and while she wanted to dismiss his fear as childish imagination, a part of her knew he wasn't lying. When she sat in the living room with her laptop, the shadows twisted toward her, not unlike liquid stretching for warmth, and her reflection in the darkened screen showed the markings moving slightly, bending across her skin as though breathing. That night, when she finally tried to sleep, the whispering grew louder, sliding into her mind like smoke through cracks in a window, promising visions, secrets, and power, and warning her that resistance would be futile. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by twitches of her arms as if the markings themselves were restless and alive. Rain lashed the windows the next evening, the drops scattering in sheets against the panes, each one reflecting the dim light of the street lamps outside. That's when Cassie noticed him. A man, tall and impossibly still, standing beyond the glass, staring directly at her with glowing amber eyes that felt like they pierced through bone. There was no expression on his face, yet it conveyed awareness, knowledge, and danger all at once. Cassie felt an almost magnetic pull toward him, as if the markings themselves recognized his presence, responding with an electric shiver that coursed through her chest. Eli pressed close to her side, muttering pleas for her to turn away, to shut the blinds, but she couldn't. Her hands trembled slightly, and the markings on her skin flared brighter, black veins glowing like molten shadows under her pale skin. That night, lying in bed, she could no longer discern her own thoughts from the whispers that now spoke in full sentences, their tone a mixture of malice and promise. Sleep became impossible. Every sound in the house, every flicker of darkness, was now a threat and a temptation all at once. By the fourth night, desperation gnawed at her. Cassie needed answers, and the attic of their creaking, old house seemed as good a place as any to find them. She pulled down the rope and ladder, stepping onto the thin, dust-choked floorboards with a sense of both dread and anticipation. The attic smelled of mildew and old wood, but among the clutter and the old trunks, she discovered a chest that seemed impossibly preserved. Inside were journals and objects, many of them etched with the same intricate symbols that had appeared on her skin, as if she were looking at her own markings in physical form. The journal spoke of an ancient demonic pact, one that had stretched over centuries, promising unimaginable power in exchange for a vessel marked by the sigils. One page made her blood run cold, the mark shall awaken the one who sleeps beneath the soil. Only obedience can bring the world to its rightful darkness. Eli hovered near the ladder, his eyes wide and shining with fear. She realized then that the markings weren't random, weren't a curse in isolation, they were a key, a call to something ancient and monstrous, and the whispers she had been hearing were simply the first instructions. A night fell like a living thing, heavy and oppressive. The shadows inside the house moved with intent, twisting into humanoid shapes, their long fingers blackened and sharp, leaving burns where they touched the walls. Eli screamed as one lunged toward him, a shadowy claw grazing his arm. Cassie felt the markings flare violently, the patterns across her skin glowing like molten cracks, forcing her hands into defensive positions she didn't consciously control. There was a surge of power, alien and intoxicating, running through her arms, her chest, her very being, and it was all she could do to keep the shadows from dragging Eli into the darkness. By dawn, the entities were gone, evaporating as if they had never existed, leaving behind only scorched marks on the furniture and a lingering sense of dread. Eli clung to her, shaking, whispering that she had changed, that she was no longer the sister he knew, and she couldn't deny it. The markings pulsed gently now, almost smugly, as if pleased with their first act of terror unleashed through her. Cassie's control, or the illusion of it, grew stronger, yet every gain came with a price. The voice no longer whispered but demanded, urging her to summon the entity that slept beneath the soil, to embrace the power she could barely understand. Desperate for guidance, she and Eli sought out Father Nolan, the town's reclusive priest, who revealed a truth that made the blood drain from her face. The markings were a key, a literal conduit for an ancient demon imprisoned beneath the town. The priest begged her to resist, warning that crossing the line would mean more than her soul, it could mean the annihilation of everything she loved. Cassie stared at her reflection in a cracked mirror, black veins crawling across her skin like rivers of shadow, and wondered if she still had the ability to resist, or if the demon had already begun shaping her into its vessel. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, each pulse a reminder that some doors, once touched, could never be closed. On the seventh night, the markings erupted across Cassie's entire body, covering her arms, neck, chest, and back in intricate, glowing sigils that throbbed with a terrible rhythm. The ground beneath the town trembled as though the earth itself feared what was about to awaken. A fissure tore open in the forest behind her house, thick black smoke rising like a tide of shadow, and the whispers escalated into a roar, triumphant and terrifying. Cassie felt her mind fracture, her will slipping as the entity within the soil extended its presence into her body. Eli watched, frozen in horror, as her hazel eyes turned molten gold, her oval face twisting into something inhuman, her once familiar hands now conduits of shadowy tendrils. The demon, immense and ancient, finally emerged from its prison, its eyes burning with an age-old hunger, while Cassie, now fused with it, became both host and herald of a darkness that would not stop.